السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before we begin, if I can just get a quick raise of hands. Is the voice clear or is there clear? Inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So, as we begin today, one of the most important and dynamic changes that a human being can make is the statement, which is the statement of Umar radiallahu an, which is sometimes attributed to Rasulullah, but it's a statement of Umar radiallahu an which explains the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Umar radiallahu an, he said, "Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu." Take account of yourselves before your account is taken, meaning taken of you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, and I want you to think of this as 3 steps, gradual steps. When Allah says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَلْتَنظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Believers, O you who've believed, those who believe in Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and in the oneness of Allah, be conscious of Allah and have fear of being disloyal to Allah and breaking Allah's rules. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَلْتَنظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ. And look and prepare and see what you have prepared for tomorrow. And then Allah again says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ, and fear Allah. Be conscious of Allah. Allah is all aware of everything that you do. Now look at the hadith of Rasulullah, step 2. Where he says, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَمَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَاعِيَتِهِ. Every single one of you is a shepherd and he's responsible for his flock. Does Rasulullah stop right there? He goes through a majority of classifications of human beings in society. He says, فَالْإِمَامُ, the imam of the believers. Not just the imam who leads a prayer, but the imam of the believers as a whole, as an ummah. راع وهو مسؤول عن رعيته. He is a shepherd and he is responsible for his flock. والرجل في بيته, and the man in his house, meaning the father, the husband, is a shepherd and he's responsible for his flock. The woman in her home, meaning the wife of that husband, is a shepherd and she's responsible for her flock. One of the narrations says that the servant, the worker, if you want to even call it, the employee, somebody who's holding somebody else's money as a trust, is a shepherd, and he's responsible for his flock. The other narration says the son is a shepherd, and he's responsible for his flock. Everyone is going to fall, a majority of human beings are going to fall into this category. Why am I mentioning this? And what does this have to do with accountability? Step 1, which was the verse, has to do with accountability. Step 2 has to do with accountability. And step 3, when Umar radiallahu anh explains this hadith in his own words, he says, "Hasibu anfusakum." Take account of yourselves before you're accounted for. This is the very statement that it was the MO, that which was the motto of Umar radiallahu anh and why he became so great. How so? Let me give you a small example or many examples. So let's live with these examples, inshallah. Number 1, the reason why we study the lives of the Sahaba, ridwanullahi alayhim, is because their life will ultimately force us to love Rasulullah. Because if you talk about any of the Sahaba, you have to talk about Muhammad. So if you love the Sahaba, you love Rasulullah. If you love Rasulullah, you love Allah. Which is why Allah says, radiyallahu anhum wa radu an, in the Quran. Allah is satisfied with them, meaning the companions of Rasulullah, and they themselves are very satisfied and understand that Allah is their creator. Before Islam, Umar radiallahu an, I want you to imagine the magnitude of this individual who used to help persecuting the people when Islam caused its rumblings in Mecca. When Muhammad ﷺ started preaching Islam, Umar radiallahu anh was at the forefront of helping people getting persecuted. There was one moment that Umar radiallahu anh had before the moment that we all know of when he heard the Quran, right? We all know that story. There's a moment that he had before that, which is documented in the Sirah and in the books of Hadith, where Umar radiallahu anh, he had, and this is before his Islam, his friends that he used to drink with. And he used to drink a lot. And the ritual of him drinking with his friends, it just happened to be some of them were very busy and he didn't have anyone to drink with and he was really bored. And he goes to the haram to do tawaf. And when he goes to the haram to do tawaf, he sees and he hears a recitation and he sees Muhammad ﷺ praying. When he sees him praying, the narration says that he wanted to get closer and closer just to hear, because he didn't see anybody else around. So there's no possibility of the other mushrikeen in Mecca thinking anything that Umar radiallahu anh is actually there to meet Muhammad ﷺ. So what he actually does is he goes under the drapes of the Kaaba and he scathes the wall of the Kaaba to listen to what Muhammad ﷺ is reading. And it happens to be that when he listens to this beautiful recitation, he thinks to himself, and Umar radiallahu anh saying this later after he becomes Muslim, he said, I said to myself, this is the saying of a poet. And then Rasulullah is reading from the Quran, this is not the saying of a poet. Umar radiallahu anh is saying, wait, how is he reading something and I'm thinking the same thing? He says, this man must be a soothsayer, a fortune teller. And then Rasulullah then reasoned, this is not the saying of a soothsayer. And he said, how is this happening to me? Every time I'm thinking something, he's saying something in his recitation, which is beautiful, which I know is not from him. It's miraculous in nature. And it happens to be he's answering my questions. So he actually leaves. He gets scared. He said, that was a moment I got scared and I left because everything I happened to be thinking, Rasulullah was reciting and he was alone. And I could have done anything I wanted to him. But he says, that was the moment that there was some planting of a seed of Islam in my heart. Fast forward, Umar radiallahu anh sees that migration is happening to Abyssinia, and he's a part of this, and he sees people leaving to go to Abyssinia on the Hijrah. Umar radiallahu anh has a conversation with a woman. And he says to her, why are you crying and leaving? She said, because of the persecution that you have caused us, we cannot believe in Allah and His Rasul, so we're fleeing. And she saw Umar radiallahu anh waver a little bit, and he said, hopefully you get to your destination safely. And she was surprised by this. She said, why is he saying this to me? She went and told her husband. She said, Umar, I think he was moved by my statement. And this is the infamous statement of him saying that not even the father of Ibn al-Khattab, not even the father of, meaning al-Khattab, his donkey would become Muslim before Umar radiallahu anhu would. This is before his Islam, because he was so staunch against Muslims. But when it got too much, he said, you know what, I have to finish this. Abu Jahl and all the heads of the Meccans are together. They're discussing how we're going to eliminate, but there's politics here because Muhammad ﷺ is from this tribe and we can't have somebody from this tribe assassinate him because it's going to cause turmoil amongst all these tribes. What does Umar radiallahu anh say? You guys are all talk. I'm just going to go finish the job. I'm going to show you guys how it's done. That's where the story begins of him waving his sword around, finding out where Muhammad ﷺ is, and it happens to be that he runs into a Sahabi. And the Sahabi says, we all know the story, right? You look like you're swinging the sword around as if you're going to do something. Where are you going? He said, I'm going to finish the job. meaning I'm going to kill Muhammad sallallahu. And this individual is also from the tribe of Umar radiallahu anh, but he's Muslim in secrecy. And he hasn't told Umar radiallahu anh. So he tries to dissuade him and say, you know what, are you sure that's a good idea? Because his tribe and your tribe, and if you guys fight, what do you think is going to happen with Banu Hashim? And Umar radiallahu anh says, have you actually been convinced of his way too? And he said, no, I'm just telling you that this is going to cause a lot of turmoil. But this Sahabi now realized that he was adamant. So he had to have a good decoy. So what does he say? He says to him, how is it that you're out to get Rasulullah sallallahu and the people of your home have accepted his religion? Umar radiallahu anh is at attention now. What do you mean? You didn't know that your sister accepted Islam? Everything changed. The mission was no longer Muhammad sallallahu, it was to find out if this was true or not. Right? I wish I can get into the details of this story. Everybody knows the story. I'm going to talk about a few things in this story, and then I'm going to move on to a story that's much more relevant to the topic of today, which is accountability. The whole thing happens, Umar radiallahu anh hears a recitation, he hits his sister, he pounces on top of her husband and starts beating him. The narration says that he almost died. The amount of blood that the husband, the sister of Umar radiallahu anh had, is that he would have died from that amount of blood and the bruises that was involved in this beating. Then finally he calms down and he says, I'm going to read, right? I want to know what you were reading. And his sister says, what? You actually have to be pure. You know, only the pure can touch this Quran. Back then it was just on a little bit of parchment of paper, a construct. And then Khabbab ibn al-Arat comes out and says, glad tidings to you, Umar. Why did Khabbab come out later? Khabbab was known as from the weakest of tribes, from who were known as the peasants. So Umar would have no hesitation killing him. But he says something to Umar which is really, really important. This is how you see when Allah favors somebody, these favors pile and pile and pile. He says that I heard Rasulullah doing dua for one of two people to become Muslim, which was Amr ibn Hisham or Umar ibn Khattab. One of these two people. So glad tidings, Umar, that Rasulullah had done dua for you and you were the one that accepted this Islam. So then Umar radiallahu anh is reading. This story we can spend 3 hours on, so I apologize. He moves on and he goes and tries to find out where Muhammad is. He goes to the house where the believers are, and Hamza radiallahu anh is sitting there with Muhammad and the Sahaba, and they hear a knocking on the door. Remember, before all of this, they didn't have a Hamza radiallahu anh. Now they do. So you have two titans in Umar radiallahu anh and Hamza. And they said, it's Umar, and they're panicked. Again, they weren't used to having a Hamza with them. And Hamza says, let him come in. If he means well, we'll let him go. If he comes in, then I'll separate his head from his body. But the exchange that happens when he opens the door, what did Muhammad do? Does anybody know when Umar came in? What's the first thing Muhammad does? He stands up and what does he do to Umar? He brings him down. He holds Umar by the collar. This is Umar, the size of two men. And this is Muhammad. He holds him by the collar, brings him down to his knees, and said, Umar, how long are you going to be this ignorant? When Umar was a lion, of course, but when Rasulullah wants to become a lion, he's the lion of all lions. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Umar was humble, and he says, I came to bear witness that there's none worthy of worship but Allah, and you are the final messenger. Look at the turnaround. Somebody who has an unsheathed sword to assassinate, quote unquote, Rasulullah, He hears the saying because of favor of Allah, and now he's humbled in front of Muhammad sallallahu. And what did he say to Muhammad sallallahu? What are we doing hiding? The first day. What are we doing hiding and worshiping Allah? Let's go to the Kaaba. They said, but the people, Umar said, forget about the people. You pray and I'll be in the back watching you guys. Anybody comes near you guys, I'll take care of them. From the first day of his Islam. See, somebody, when they know the truth and they know there's accountability, look at the actions that they take. This is where the accountability portion starts. There's a lot more in the life of times of Umar. But bear with me here. The believers start praying, Umar is behind them. The non-Muslims, the Mushrikeen al-Makkah are not used to this. Umar radiallahu anh, the narration said that he was fighting all of them. And remember, Umar radiallahu anh was a wrestler. Him, Khalid and Walid, there are many people who were known to be powerful, very strong wrestlers that people usually didn't mess with. So they had tribes gang up on Umar radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh said, I went hours just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting all of them. This is why the believers are praying. So the believers are praying, they're in their khushu', they hear a bunch of fighting in the background. Umar radiallahu anh is taking everybody out. So Umar said, I got so tired that I held one of the heads, the chiefs of our tribes, and I put my finger, I sat on his chest, I was too heavy, I put my fingers in his eyes. And I told him, tell all of your men to back down, because if they don't, I'm going to gouge your eyes out. And he literally stuck his fingers in his eyes. You know how you hold somebody hostage? You know, in a contemporary scenario with a gun or even a knife or a sword in their time. With him, it was a lot more intimate than that. It was his fingers in his eyes. And he said, tell them not to move and tell them to back up. And then, or else you're not going to have eyes anymore. So he tells them, everybody stop. Just let them pray. Leave him alone. And Umar said, I got rest and I got back up again, expecting that I was going to have a fight. That was from the first day of his Islam. Radiallahu anhu. And while he's leaving, fast forward to the hijrah of Medina, when the Muslims have to go to Medina from Mecca, you know, when we prepare to go on a trip, it's a love-hate feeling, especially those of us who don't travel that much. You know, you go to the store, you go to the travel section, you buy all the small stuff that you're going to need. There's this excitement. You're going to already think about your family, of all the stuff you prepared. There's a jitteriness. You can't get to sleep. You're excited because you're going to get on the plane, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. There's all this excitement, right? And you're preparing just for your travel. And that's what human beings do. That's what a majority of the people of Medina, but there's a different. They're afraid for their lives and their families, because some of them have to leave their families. So when we prepare for travel, it's a really exciting. There's this anxiety is built up, but it's a nice anxiety, and you have a smile on your face, you get fresh, you leave, and you take a shower, you want to get on the plane, and you plan all these things, you take a book with you, or what does he do? Before he travels, he takes his sword out, again, swinging it, and he says, whoever wants to be a widow, whoever wants to widow their wives, come and stop me, I'm going to Medina. A lot of the Muslims are going in secrecy. Umar is open. He's not even preparing for his trip. This is how he's preparing for his trip. It's a gruesome trip. Whoever wants to make their children yatim, come and stop me. I'm going to Medina. What if I was to tell you the biggest caravan of people who were Muslim in secrecy that day became Muslim? Umar radiallahu anh ended up having the biggest caravan going to Medina. And they were like, we have Umar. All the people, they were like, just let them go. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were actually unsure. They were jealous that Muhammad ﷺ got away, but they didn't know that Muhammad ﷺ was going to have the whole world in his hands. And Umar radiallahu anh was going to continue that legacy. The legacy of Umar radiallahu anh. In his reign, imagine Muhammad ﷺ passing away, Abu Bakr's reign being 2 years, Umar radiallahu anh's reign being 10 years of Khalifa. In his reign, imagine on the outskirts of Pakistan, to India, to Afghanistan, to on the borders and of Iran and all these areas, and from the west, Algeria, in that area, all of that becoming Muslim under the reign of Umar radiallahu anh. Right? So this tough attitude of Umar radiallahu anh continues. And Muhammad says, if there was ever a prophet after me, if there was, you would find it in Umar radiallahu anh. But was he always that tough? He was. But what happened after he became Khalifa? This is where everything settled in for him. This is where we understand the saying of him, also of Umar radiallahu anh, that when you're at home, by the way, Umar radiallahu anh institutionalized a lot of things in our ummah of what we do today. We all know this. The Hijri calendar, right? He's also the sayer of the statement of when you're at home, be very playful like a child. He's talking to the fathers. Be playful with your child, meaning wrestle with your kids. Be playful, be joyous. Be obviously on top of the salawat and the halal and haram, but be very playful. But when you're in public, be a lion. This is Umar radiallahu anh. The statements of Umar radiallahu anh happen to be when Rasulullah says, if there's a prophet after me, it'd be Umar. Imagine these statements of Muhammad, some of the best explanations in the hadith of Muhammad are the statements of Umar radiallahu anh. It's not a coincidence. It's by design, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Umar radiallahu anh, after assuming the position of Khilafah, where do we start? We've heard all of it. But let's hear it again, inshallah. And let's look at it from a different angle of accountability. Al-muhasabah. Imagine being the most successful of the Muslims up until that time, to the point where contemporary historians of the 100 most influential people of the world, that Michael Hart wrote, number 54 or 59 is Umar radiallahu anh, Muhammad sallallahu being number 1, I think Jesus being 2, but within those 100 most influential people. Imagine in the UN, the statements that are engraved in the UN of Umar radiallahu anh, in the United Nations building, that how can a man be, the statement is, how can a man be slaved who was born to be free, or who was born free? Right? This is engraved even in the United States, in the UN. Like, even the non-Muslims understand, no matter how much they love Islam or Muslims, or how much they dislike or have disdain for Muslims, they all have to take their hats off for Umar radiallahu anh. With the busyness of running the most greatest expansion that Muslims have ever seen in that 10 years, ever, even up until now. Imagine even in that, Umar radiallahu anh at night making rounds. You know how busy you have to be the leader? We don't really understand. We think that they were living some primitive life. And no, Umar radiallahu anh was actually very, very advanced for his time, much more advanced for his time, and you're going to know from the story. He's making his rounds, and he hears, when he's passing by the tents, going on the outskirts, and he hears a child crying within the tent. And the second round, he comes around, and he says, who's in this tent? And the mother answers. She says, it's me and my child. He says, calm your child down, because your child is crying very much. His heart is going out for the child. He comes back again on his third round, and he says, what is happening to this child that keeps crying? This is my third time around. I hear this child crying. What are you doing? And she says, through the tent, I am weaning my child off of nursing the child. I'm breastfeeding my child. But I'm weaning him off because it happens to be this Amir of Mu'mineen of ours named Umar. He's only going to give the child tax to us. He's the first one to start the child tax, meaning a welfare given to the family if you have a child. But the condition was after the child is not feeding from the mother anymore and is eating solid food now. Yes, he's the first one to institutionalize this. And she said that he's put us in this predicament, so I have to wean this child off. And we don't really have that much food to eat. And this type of incident happened with Umar multiple times. Radiallahu anh. He goes to the Baytul Mal and he tells the people to give him money. And he asks this woman, says, please forgive Umar. How much money can you stand in front of Allah and say that I can give you, that you're going to forgive Umar? And she says, give me 25 dirham. At that time, that was a lot of money. He literally goes and gets that money from the Baytul Mal. And he says, can you write a contract so we have something physical in front of Allah in Yawm al-Qiyamah that you've forgiven me? From that day, the next day, he goes on the minbar and he says, "O believers, the policy has changed of the welfare money that I'm going to be giving to every family. Every child that's born now, well, from the time of their birth, the family is going to be getting the money, not after the child weans off." Because of one lady. He changes his policy because of one lady. Umar radiallahu anhu. The same person that we hear of, again making his rounds with his servant Aslam. And again, towards the outskirts, he sees children and a woman, and she's in a very difficult situation. They're all crying. And he says, "Why are all of your children crying?" And Aslam actually vouches for Umar radiallahu anhu in this story. And she says to him, "I'm actually fooling the kids," meaning there's no food that I'm cooking in this pot. They're just rocks because we don't have any food. So I'm hoping that my children have hope that there's food, but they're going to fall asleep in the process, but we don't have any food. And she says, meanwhile, and we hear this repetitive thing of people who don't know who Umar radiallahu anhu is. The man of 17 patches, he's known in history. His clothing, 17 patches. Because he's afraid to take from the wealth of the people to buy himself clothes. What a shining example for Muslims. This lady says, Umar is too busy in his palace. He's not concerned with people like us. So he says to Aslam, he says to her, "I'll be right back." He says to Aslam, "Come with me, we're going to go to the Bayt al-Mal." And he grabs wheat and he grabs food and all of that. He comes to the lady's house, to the tent, and he said, "You take care of the child, me and my servant will help you make this food." This didn't only happen once. This happened another time when a lady was in labor, and he hears the agonizing labor, and he goes and he gets his sister. It may have been his sister or his daughter, so excuse me if I'm not exactly correct. He goes and gets her to help be the midwife to help her give birth, and then Umar and the husband are making food. They still don't know it's Umar yet. The narration says that he's blowing on the fire after he got the wood, and there's smoke going through his beard. And you can see the ashes flying through his beard and his face to prepare the food. Imagine the Khalifa of the believers kneading the dough in order to feed this family who doesn't have food and the wife is in labor. And then the daughter of Umar radiallahu anh says, "Give glad tidings to your friend," meaning the husband, that they've given birth to a boy. This is a leader. When Muhammad says, "Kullukum ra'in wa mas'ulun an ra'iyatihi," every single one of you is a shepherd and he's responsible for his flock. This is what he's referring to. But this is talking about accountability, because he knows, the way Muhammad knew, that if he dies and people are feeling that they were oppressed by this individual, that Allah is going to stand him, which is why he was sick from the verse, وَقِفُوهُمْ إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ. He said, this verse makes me sick. The verse says that bring them to account and drag them. It's talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah, because they were responsible. They had a responsibility. Imagine somebody who understood responsibility so well, was so selfless, that Islam just happens to flourish the most in his 10 years than it ever has before. Islam has never been the same ever since the death of Umar radiallahu anh. Do you think it happens to be because we had never somebody who happened to be in responsibility in the position of imamah of the believers, or in our local masajid, or in our homes, is somebody like him? A time where there was nobody to give zakat to? What was the second time that there was nobody to give zakat to? It happened to be the grandson of Umar radiallahu anh, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And look at this. This is how there's no such thing as a coincidence. Umar is also making his rounds again. We get you start thinking, did he not have time of being like the superpower, the man who's running the biggest superpower, the biggest force to be reckoned with at that time, where people said there were illiterate Bedouins, but they're taking over the world? Shouldn't he be much more busy? Of course, but he managed his time very well too, and Allah put lots of barakah in his wealth, in his time. He's making his rounds again, and he likes to hear, if things are loud, he likes to hear what's happening to make sure everything's fine, not eavesdropping. If any of you guys have walked through a village, if any of you guys ever lived in villages, at nighttime when you're walking or in the morning, you can hear people talking. And if you stop, you can actually hear their conversations, right? Because the windows and the doors or whatever the case, they're open, they're cracked, whatever the case is, right? So he hears a conversation between a mother and a daughter. And he hears a mother say, because this family sells milk, it's a mother and a daughter. So she said, put some water in it so we can make more money. Meaning mix it in the milk. What does the daughter say? It's illegal to do that. What does she mean it's illegal? She said, Amir al-Mu'mineen said it's illegal to do that. The mother said, well, Amir al-Mu'mineen is not here, daughter. She says, well, the Lord of Amir al-Mu'mineen is watching. Umar radiallahu anh hears this, remembers the door. One of the narrations says that he marks the door and he walks away. And what did he do? He tells his son, I found an amazing daughter. I found an amazing, inshallah, potential daughter-in-law for you, which ended up being his daughter-in-law. Who did they give birth to? To Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the other Khalifa, which they call the fifth of the Khulafa. Also the second time only in history where there was no one available to give zakat to. The reign of Umar radiallahu an, same name, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. That reign also, where no one actually had to give zakat, was deserving or needed zakat. Because the flourishing in the economy and the advancement in the rest of the world, there was nowhere else in the world where people were so well off because of taqwa. Not because of any type of deception, because of their taqwa. But there was no other place in the world like this that existed, where there's nobody that's taking. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said to the guards, maybe the people are scared, leave the Bayt al-Mal unguarded, so people are probably afraid. That's probably why they're not asking for their zakat. Then he said, whoever wants to get married, come to the Bayt al-Mal and take money as you wish. Left unguarded. That's what happens when there's not poverty. And it happens to be that taqwa guides that lack of poverty. People don't care about money anymore. They care about Allah. Right? Because they're not worried about feeding themselves and their families because of a corrupt society that has a very small percentage of very wealthy people, which is based on interest, and a huge disproportionate population of people who can't even afford $500. A majority of Americans, even until now, if they had a bill, all of a sudden bill of $500, they wouldn't be able to afford that bill for whatever unforeseen circumstance. Anyways, so Umar, this is the Umar radiallahu anh. Why? Responsibility. But it doesn't end with human beings. Umar radiallahu anh in his khilafah, and he actually had other governance that took care of the people of Mecca, the people of Yemen. And there was a Christian man from Asham, if I'm not mistaken, who was racing Amr ibn al-As's son. They actually had a race, like physical race and like strength competitions or whatever the case may be. And the Christian man, after he lost, or he won, the son of Amr ibn al-As just got a little carried away, in physical competitions, people get emotional, they get charged up. He strikes him and he knocks him to the floor, this Christian man. The Christian man goes and complains to Umar radiallahu anh. This is well documented in Islamic history and in narrations. Umar radiallahu anh, you know what he does? He says to his governor, summon Amr ibn al-As and his son. Because the son, in the name of the father, because his father had the power in that government of Islam, of Muslims, so Umar radiallahu anh, he said, summon the son and the father. And he brought the Christian man in front of them, and he gave him a whip. And he says, whip the son and whip the father. Okay, why the father? He said, because he did it in your name. The father had nothing to do with this. But because Umar radiallahu anh is setting this precedence of fairness and justice, it doesn't matter if it's a Muslim or not. It has to do with justice. Islam is a religion of justice. It doesn't matter. We don't care about what may, because of the truth, may hurt some people's feelings, or to be, to have a certain type of opinion and to deceive people and say, you know what, we have to do this for the people to make sure everybody's happy. Let's just let this haram go, and it becomes a habit. Not with Umar radiallahu anh. Forget about this. Look at Umar radiallahu anh. You think he let the animals go too? When he found out that people were overburdening their camels with luggage and they were collapsing to the ground, he said, Umar is responsible for those camels. Don't overburden your camels. Allahu Akbar. And he says, I'm paving the ways properly in some of the routes of business that used to take place, because I don't want the mules to stand in front of me on Yawm al-Qiyamah and say, and fell and got injured because Umar didn't pave the way. These are true stories. These aren't fairy tales. This is our legacy. This is who we are. It just seems so outlandish because we can't see any example of that in our time. But this is what accountability and muhasabah does. Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. Take account of yourselves before you are taken to account. So if we can focus a little bit on accountability, inshallah, and we can open the floor for some discussion points. But muhasabah, which is what we refer to as accountability, is actually not something very complicated and difficult. It may sound like a very intimidating or tedious word, but it's not. Our deen, actually, if we look at our ibadat appropriately, accountability is very easy. And it's simple, but being consistent with it can be tedious, so let's talk about it in a very simple way. Generally, what the Sahaba used to do in the past, we hear about even Rasulullah in tahajjud. He wasn't just reading surahs in tahajjud, in his prayer. He was also being accountable for himself, which is why tears would flow down his face. Same thing with Umar. Do you know that there were like indentation and black marks on Umar radiallahu anhu's face because of his crying that he used to do, of his standing in front of Allah, and also because of the responsibility that people have over him? His fear is, what are people going to say about me on Yawm al-Qiyamah in front of Allah? What are they going to say about me? So accountability, how used to be practiced is, before you go to sleep or when you wake up in the morning, think about what you did. Think about especially the main things that you did that you remember, especially if you're sleepy. And think about how you could have done that better. And if there was anything haram, you ask for forgiveness. Why is that actually difficult? Because number one, what it is training you to do is training you to be truthful to yourself. Sometimes, and all of us, I'm very guilty of this too, we actually make excuses for ourselves and we become weak and we lie to ourselves and we believe those lies. And then when we're asked about it, we act like we have some truth, but in reality we don't. It's just us trying to let that self-chatter in our brain, to fight that self-chatter so we feel comfortable with doing something wrong or not living to our full potential. And all of us are guilty of this, which is fine. Allah is forgiving. And we ask for forgiveness. But what if I was to tell you Allah has designed these pegs in our daily life to use and then think everything between those pegs? Our number one muhasabah should be, start off with the most basic that a child can do. Did I pray all 5 of my salawat? This is how easy and simple this is. Consistency is the key though. Did I pray all 5 of my salawat? Yes, I did. Alhamdulillah. Go to sleep. Next week, after making sure that you prayed 5 of your salawat, did I pray on time or did I delay? And all of us are guilty of this. I am guilty of this probably more than anybody here, right? And may Allah protect us from nifaq. Because Allah, when He talks about the people who delayed prayer, وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالًا, when they stand up for prayer, they stand up, but they're actually lazy. But these are, Allah's talking about the munafiqun. The munafiqun actually prayed with the Muslims, and they prayed all the prayers with the Muslims on time. But they got up out of laziness. And Allah is calling them munafiqun. He's calling, these are the people, if you want to know the signs around you, of those people who are actually trying to infiltrate your lines amongst the Muslims and trying to get to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at these people who come to salah in a lazy manner. They're attending all 5 prayers in the masjid, but they're lazy. Allah protect us from laziness. So the next thing would be was I praying on time? Do that for a week. Again, this is very simple. And then you start thinking, okay, from the signs of the hypocrite in the hadith is that those who don't go to the masjid for Fajr and Isha, there's hypocrisy inside of their hearts. Doesn't mean they are hypocrites. And it's worth mentioning, please. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying or misunderstand what I'm saying. Hopefully I'm being clear. There's different levels of hypocrisy in Islam. Hypocrisy, the grave hypocrisy, are those hypocrites that acted like they were Muslims, but they weren't Muslims. I want you to rewind to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. Why were hypocrites so important to know for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And Allah telling us the signs, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling us the signs. Because a hypocrite, as far as iman, meaning acting like you're a Muslim, are those people who acted like they were Muslim to infiltrate the lines of the believers, to give intelligence to the mushrikeen, the whereabouts, and the Persians, and the Romans, where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, so they can assassinate him. Those were the hypocrites. That's the context of hypocrisy. Yes, there's other reasons why someone may become Muslim for the sake of being Muslim to get certain perks, but they're actually not Muslim. They actually go back to their people. Those are also the hypocrites that Allah is referring to in the Quran. There's also a form of hypocrisy, which is a lower form of hypocrisy, and Allah protect us from this hypocrisy. Also, are those people who say to do something, but they don't do it. They're still Muslims, but they're just committing haram. And when I say just committing haram, it's not light to commit a haram. That's not why I'm saying it like that. But in comparison to the hypocrisy, this hypocrisy is still very wrong. And Allah protect us from that type of hypocrisy. And even simpler now, remember I said Allah gave us these 5 pegs throughout the day that stamp and solidify our day. Another level now of muhasabah is I have these timestamps, Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. It's so easy to think, okay, today between Fajr and Dhuhr, what did I do? Oh, that sticks out. That wasn't good. I shouldn't have done that. Again, that's not easy to do because sometimes you get in a fight, sometimes you get an argument, whether it's someone you work with or even your spouse. May Allah protect us from those arguments because those are atrocious and gruesome. Allah protect us from the stuff we say to dig deep and cut deeper. We love each other. We love our wives and our husbands for those, who are married. But sometimes a fight is not about you don't love this person. You love this person. Obviously, you just want to cut the deepest, right? Especially those who started working remotely. They know how crazy that got, right? But Allah protect us from that. And it's very difficult when you're trying to one-up your spouse at night before you go to sleep, think to Allah, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that, and that was wrong. That takes real guts. That's why muhasabah, who can do it, they're the people of Jannah. They're the people like Umar radiallahu anh, because it's so difficult. Because when you're in it, you're in it. You have all this waswas and chatter coming to yourself. If I don't make the stand in my house, no one's going to respect my authority, and they're not going to. There's all this stuff that goes through your mind when you're arguing. Trust me, all of us have been there. I'm just speaking openly because we have to be real with ourselves. In order to muhasabah, you have to be real, brothers and sisters. You can't fake it. You can't sugarcoat and think, hopefully, especially like I'm the least deserving to be in this position. If anyone should be in this position talking about muhasabah, it should be a child who hasn't gone through puberty yet because their hisab hasn't actually started. They're most rightful to be speaking about this, and we should be listening to them attentively. Umar radiallahu anh used to go to the prepubescent children of his khilafah and ask them for dua. Amir of the believers used to say, ask Allah to forgive me. Why did he do that? Because their du'as are accepted because they haven't hit puberty yet. This is a real human being. Forget about a real man, the pinnacle of humanity. And how would you expect anything less than the best of students of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? So Umar radiallahu anh and his muhasabah is what got him where he was. Think now between Dhuhr and Asr, what did I do? that wasn't good. Or that was good, but I could have done a lot better. I was just trying to get away with as little as possible. But I'm still just trying to get paid, but I'm trying to do as little as possible just to get paid. We've all been there, right? And then between Asr and Maghrib, what did I do? I mean, Allah bless you guys. This is a Friday night. And Allah bless all of the Muslims, but compared to the society and the societies of the world, people will think we're losers for sitting in the masjid talking about Allah and His Rasul and the Khulafa. These guys got nothing better. These backward Neanderthals, archaic people, they're in a mosque talking about God. What the heck kind of people are these? No, alhamdulillah, we're the people of Allah. That's why we're here. This is actually our protection. This is our shield, because we could have been anywhere else. Alhamdulillah, may Allah guide our intentions, so we did this for the right reason. And then between Maghrib and Isha, what did I do, Ya Allah? Forgive me for doing this and doing this and doing this. You know what? I was in the masjid and a child, and I'm not saying this because of here. I'm just saying this because we're in the masjid. But please, brothers and sisters, please have mercy on our children. If we get mad at them for running and making noise in the masjid, they will not love the masjid. Every masjid has its own policy. I respect that. So I'm telling the masjid, I have no skin in this game. I'm just saying so we can up the bar a little bit. Let us just think of what Umar radiallahu anh, you know, Umar radiallahu anh instituted the lines being straight. He actually employed people to make sure when the jama'ah started, the lines were straight, and then he would start the salah. But his teacher, the greatest teacher, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, imagine standing in prayer, leading the Sahaba, these mountains that we're talking about right now. And he speeds his prayer up because he hears a baby crying. After he finished his prayer, he said, I prayed fast because I felt for the heart of the mother. You could find this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. I did that for the mother. It wasn't just for the baby, it was for the heart of the mother, because you know what it's like when you bring a child to the masjid, the child's crying. You're thinking, oh, the child, but the mother's thinking about it differently. This baby, I got to do this, and we're thinking the disturbance and all that. Did Muhammad ever say, don't bring your children to the masjid because they make noise? It's a place, it's a community. It's the best community place to have. It's the best community center to have, which is a masjid. They're supposed to make noise. It's a community center. If there's no noise in the masjid, that means there's no children in the masjid, which means we're doing something very wrong. And we're not following the sunnah of Rasulullah, and we're definitely not following the sunnah of the khulafa. Let them make noise. If all else fails, it's going to be better for your khushu', that I got to work on my khushu'. The children have to make noise. That's what they do. They run in between lines. Who cares? If they don't play in the masjid, they kicked out of the masjid. You think they're going to have love for the masjid? What about the father that's called out? Whose child is this? I'm not saying this happens in this masjid. I grew up this way. I'm just saying. Maybe it doesn't happen anymore. Inshallah, it doesn't happen anymore. Whose child is this? Stand up the father and shame him in front. You think he's going to come to this masjid anymore? You think he's going to love the masjid? You think a father who's responsible for the family to love Allah and His Rasul and love the masjid, if you think that father is going to love coming to the masjid? What type of embarrassment are we causing to our ummah? Right? So please be very, very cognizant. And the best example is of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also leading the Sahaba in prayer. In sajda, Hassan radiallahu an, as a baby, jumps on the back of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By the way, you know Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, remember how Umar radiallahu an said, he said, when you're at home, be playful like a child, but when you're outside, be a lion. Who do you think he learned that from? He learned from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, authentic hadith, he says, I get on all fours and I become a horse for my grandchildren, and I run around the horse so they can be on my back and see if they can stay on my back. And they love that game, so I play it with them. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, guys. He's praying. Hassan's used to that mannerism of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sees him leading the Sahaba in prayer. He jumps on his back when he's in sajda, leading these mountains of every individual of these Sahaba are mountains, every single one of them. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in sajda, longer than usual because the fard prayers in congregation. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't spend long hours in sajda in congregation out of mercy of the people. He did it when he was on his own. longer than usual. The Sahaba thought, some of them said, after they found out the reason, they said, some of us were thinking of breaking our prayer and thinking something happened to Muhammad sallallahu, i.e. he may have passed away. When Muhammad sallallahu was finished, what did he say? Such a simple reasoning. He says, Hassan, he climbed on my back, he was playing, I didn't want to move and startle him, so I let him finish. Allahu Akbar. Guys, this is our deen. I'm not saying any of us are guilty of not doing this. I'm just saying, if you want to be accountable in front of Allah, if your child is playing on your back while you're praying, let him finish. He's going to love you for it, instead of reprimanding him. I'm not saying any of us do this. I'm sorry I keep explaining this. I just don't want to be the person who comes to the message accusing people of something. I'm not accusing anybody of this. I'm just saying, if we want to be and raise the bar of accountability and make changes the way Umar radiallahu anh made, and we see the world around us, think of why that is. We have people in positions, including ourselves, in our homes, as fathers, I'm talking about myself, who is a father of children, and he is not fit for that position. Every single one of us has a position, and we can do a lot better in that position. I'm not going to get political, but think about all the catastrophes that are happening in the world and happening in Palestine, in Jerusalem. By the way, who was the first one to open the gates of Jerusalem? Who was it? Umar radiallahu anh. Muhammad sallallahu, based on a hadith, said, if you get a chance to give the oil to burn the lanterns of Al-Quds, be a part of that. Umar radiallahu anh said, I want to be a part of that. They laid siege to Jerusalem for 4 months under the command of Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anh. 4 months. But this wasn't a siege of violence. They waited outside for Sophronius to stand down. And he didn't stand down. And he said, I'm only going to give the keys of Jerusalem to Umar, so he has to come. This is where we hear the story of an expedition actually is sent by Sophronius to Umar radiallahu anh, and they see a man in the masjid. This is where this narration comes from, where they see a man in the masjid napping with 17 patches on his garment. Who is this? This is the Amir of the... This is who's going to open the keys. And these guys, when they came to Umar radiallahu anh, they have jewelry, golden chains, crowns, and they're, this man, this is his headquarters, this masjid, and he's sleeping in the corner, he's sleeping in dust. What if I was to tell you that Sophronius says that we want it from the people that our scriptures said that the just ruler with patches on his clothing will be given the keys to Jerusalem? It's in Umar radiallahu anh in the scriptures. Allah talks about the Sahaba being in the scriptures. In Surah Al-Fath, in the ending of Surah Al-Fath. You can read that. I don't want to get into that. There's going to be a whole other amazing ordeal, but we're not going to get into that. So they approach him. Umar radiallahu anh goes with his servant. Again, we all know the story. But think of accountability. He could have been like, I'm running the greatest superpower in the world. You want me to come and get the keys? No, I'm sending somebody. If you don't like it, the heck with you. We're just going to wage war on you. Umar radiallahu anh goes. The Sahaba are waiting for him. He goes with his servant. They're taking turns riding the camel. Umar radiallahu anh didn't even have a turban on his head in that heat. And it happens to be the 17 patch thobe that he has on. He falls into the mud and gets mud all over his thobe on his way to get the keys to Jerusalem. By the way, the people have always fought over Jerusalem, even before Muhammad sallallahu. Genghis Khan and all these other people, even who came afterwards, made deals with the Muslims. The Turks made deals, and many Muslim entities sold out the Muslims because everybody wanted Jerusalem in history before Islam and during Islam and even till now. The most contested place in the world is Masjid al-Aqsa. Mecca and Medina, never contested. Yeah, had small turmoil here and there. Nothing anybody ever really thinks about. Jerusalem until Yawm al-Qiyamah is going to be under this turmoil. Who's going to be opening Jerusalem? It's going to be Umar radiallahu anh. He's also in the scriptures that the Christians know about. The same way Muhammad sallallahu was in the scriptures, that there's going to be this just person who's going to emerge from the mountains of Paran, from Mecca, and he's going to be the final messenger. And Muhammad ﷺ was foretold by Isa alayhi that if this messenger comes, you follow him. And if you want to be true Christians, you want to follow him, and he's going to be saying, La ilaha illallah. This is Umar radiallahu anhu. So now, Umar radiallahu anhu is given the keys. Sophronius gives him the keys and says, I'm only going to give it to you. The handover happens. And Umar radiallahu anhu says, let's walk around. Give me a tour. By the way, how many minutes do I have left? I'm sorry. 2 minutes? 3 minutes? 3? 5. 5 minutes, inshallah. So, Umar radiallahu anhu says, let's go on a tour. He gives Sophronius a tour. He comes all the way there and he leads the Sahaba in prayer. Where does he lead the Sahaba in prayer? The same place where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Isra al-Miraj, leads all the other prophets in prayer. So if you're going to pray in Al-Quds, 120,000 plus messengers who came from the past, up until Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, you're going to be doing sajda where one of the prophets did sajda. Umar now is leading the Sahaba, mirror of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If there was to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar radiallahu anhu. Why? Because of his selflessness, because of his accountability. Sophronius says, you know what? Let's do our prayers together. We're going to pray, and then you can pray in our church. What is in this holy sepulcher, which is still there? Umar says, I can't do that. The people who come after me are going to think this is a part of their deen. I'm going to pray somewhere else. Now there's a masjid called Masjid Umar, 100 feet away from the sepulcher, the greatest church in the world probably. And there was, even after Umar radiallahu anhu's time, there was turmoil amongst the Christian factions of that church. Who still holds the keys to opening those doors every day? It's a Muslim family. Because the Christians were actually very just. We have to give them that. They said, we want somebody who's not partisan, who's going to be responsible for this church. Let it be these people who are the Muslims that actually allowed us to practice our deen. Umar radiallahu anh told the people, let them practice their deen. Umar radiallahu anh followed the sunnah of Rasulullah and said that if they have turmoil amongst themselves, he's the first ruler to ever do this, also Muhammad sallallahu in the history of humanity. If they have a disagreement, let them have their own courthouses for their own religion so they can judge between each other. Umar radiallahu anh could have said, you guys can be judged by Islam. He didn't do that. Because of his accountability, he didn't want to be accountable by the animals. He didn't want to be accountable by the non-Muslims. And he sure as heck didn't want to be accountable by the Muslims and everybody else around him. Why? Because of his muhasabah. Because of his accountability. That's why he says, Hasibu anfusakum. Take accountability of yourselves before you're taken accounted for. So brothers and sisters, in conclusion, please, 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 be accountable for ourselves. And I'm speaking to myself. The reason I'm giving this talk is because I'm going to be straight honest with you, brothers and sisters. I have to be more accountable for myself. And if I say this to people in front of the masjid, I have to be more accountable for myself. I have a vested interest in this. I am very stingy in this manner. I'm a weak person, and sometimes I have to tell people in order to be more accountable. So let's all be accountable together, inshallah, and follow the sunnah of Rasulullah and the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be amongst those people who do hisab of themselves on a regular basis. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise our ranks and not expect people like Umar radiallahu anh. We want people from ourselves and our progeny to be and have justice like Umar radiallahu anh and have a reign in this ummah to be like the likes of Umar radiallahu anh. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakumullah khairan for that talk. This concludes the program for this evening. We're going to have this program every fourth Friday of the month. So every fourth Friday of the month, Sheikh Amir will be here with us. We don't have a topic decided for next month. So if you have any suggestions, let me know or let him know as well, and then we'll consider it, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. We have some refreshments outside. Also, reminder, we have a Sirat al-Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's program next month, the 13th and the 14th. 13th is after Maghrib. The one on the 13th is in Urdu after Maghrib, and then we have one on the 14th, which is after Asr. That's going to be in English. We have multiple speakers, multiple reciters. We request all of you to come. The flyers are outside. Please make sure that you grab some and share it with your family and friends. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.